Ladies and gentlemen, we're back for another episode of the Hitting the Field podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Brener, and today we are breaking down the draft that is officially behind us by looking at the official NFC draft classes and giving our own report card grades. And I can't do this alone, so I brought along two of HTF's best and brightest along for the ride. For one of our guests today on the show. He's very excited about Jordan Brooks. It's Chris Wolf. Chris, you're the biggest
Yeah,
Jordan Brooks stan I know.
yep. I fell in love with him after looking at his tape, and I've fallen in love with how he plays, and I think he fits well. But we'll go in depth more on that.
Yeah, and the next guest on the show today, not sure how he feels about this person, but it must be a love-hate relationship with Jordan Love. It's John Whitley. John,
Yep. I can't say I'm in love with the pick, but you know what? It's great to be here, so we'll
there you
see.
go. All right, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go through the NFC, and we're gonna go through what we think about each team, their draft picks. Did they satisfy their team's needs? Did they not? And we'll throw a grade on them. And we'll start off. I guess we'll start off in the NFC East. With the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the Philadelphia Eagles had one of the more exciting drafts and one of the drafts that caught people's attentions. Starting off their draft, they got the 21st pick with Jalen Rager. Some of their more some of the more notable finds. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. They got Jalen Hurts in the second round to be, I guess, some kind of quarterback. Who knows? Who knows what Philly's doing? But they also get Kayvon Wallace, safety out of Clemson, in the fourth round. And then they get a bunch of receivers to really help Carson Wentz out there. I'll start with you, John. Philly at the draft. We were talking about at the draft show about how Justin Jefferson was on the board, but they went with Jalen Rager. What are your thoughts on Jalen Rager and how he can possibly help this Philly offense?
Yeah, I think it was a good pick. I think it was a little bit of a surprise, like you said, having Justin Jefferson still on the board. But I think it comes down to the fact that Jalen Rager is just a more versatile player. He can make an impact on special teams. You can put him in the slot. You can put him outside. So I think ultimately this pick just came down to versatility.
Yeah, I wasn't as frustrated with the pick as some other Eagles fans at Hitting the Field were. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an Eagles fan, but I thought that even with Justin Jefferson on the board, I think Jalen Rager has the tools to be a solid receiver in the Philly offense. I think that what hurt Jalen Rager in a way was that his quarterback at TCU, not the most accurate passer, and that's ultimately why I think Jalen Rager's numbers were not as high as Justin Jefferson's, who's catching passes from the number one pick of this draft, Joe Burrow. So now, Chris, what did you think about the Jalen Rager pick over Justin Jefferson?
Um, I also agree that it was a little surprise because I thought that Justin Jefferson would have been the guy for Philly, but learning what I've seen from the 3 days of the draft is that they wanted speed, and Justin Jefferson's not really like the speedy guy, and Jalen Rager is, and I think that is probably why they went with it. I think they want to be fast outside. That's
Yeah.
they pretty much put an emphasis on that during the whole draft process.
Philly had the need for speed, and they definitely satisfied it here. Another person that they got in undrafted free agency is someone we know very well, Adrian Killens. So they definitely needed speed there. Just quick thoughts on Adrian Killens. What are your chances? Like, put a number on it, percentage wise, that he'll be on Philly's roster at the beginning of the season.
Well, so I'd give him a chance just because like you can always have him back there returning punts, returning kick returns, but I don't think it's a very good chance. I'd probably give him Just under a 20% chance to make the roster.
20%. Chris, what do you think?
About a quarter,
Yeah.
25.
Yeah, this is a very tough year to come out of the draft because rookie mini camps, not every team's holding them, and if they are holding them, it's virtual, and that really hurts. That means a lot of people that would have been in rookie mini camps, gotten some invitations, aren't getting those invitations. So you really have to show out in training camp, and training camp is in uncertainty as well. The preseason, where a lot of these undrafted guys get a chance to try to make the roster, are not going to have those same opportunities. So this year could be a very difficult year. I think Adrian Killens would have had a better chance to make the roster had he come out of a different year or had this offseason been a little less unique. But another oddity of the Philadelphia Eagles draft that I do want to bring up is selecting Jalen Hurts with the 53rd pick. Now, obviously, you drafted Carson Wentz in 2016. He is the quarterback of the future. You've committed to him. John, why the need to draft Jalen Hurts in the second round?
Well, first of all, state the obvious is that Carson Wentz hasn't been able to stay on the field, and that's really been the biggest problem for the Eagles. So I think to get a guy who can be a solid backup for in case Wentz goes down is good. And plus, there's so much you can do with this kid. He played a little bit of receiver at Alabama. You can design special packages that have him in as sort of a wildcat offense type of quarterback, like the Saints use Taysom Hill. So, I think there's a lot you can do with him here. I think I get Eagles fans' frustration because their top need just wasn't quarterback, and there was good players on the board at other positions. But I think ultimately it's going to turn out to be a really good pick.
Yeah, I mean, you look at where Jalen Hurts was drafted. Jalen Hurts was drafted 53rd. If you wanted to address the pass rush, AJ Epinesa went 54th. If you wanted, if you wanted like a linebacker, I knew they needed to look for like an outside linebacker. Zach Bond still on the board. Julian Aquara taken early in the third round. They had other needs there. If they wanted to go for another receiver, Denzel Mims was on the board who went 59th. So, Chris, what did you think of the Jalen Hurts pick? Was it premature? And if it was, who would you have taken with that second round pick that Philly had?
I'm not too on board with it. I thought that was kind of like, okay, here's the thing. If he wouldn't have been at Alabama, if he wouldn't have been at Oklahoma last year and he wouldn't have showed out at quarterback, maybe it would have been a better pick because he would have been more of a gadget player. But because of how he improved so much as a quarterback, I think he wants to play quarterback in the NFL. And it might be a little difficult, though, if you're going to say about any backup job. The Eagles' backup job would be one of the better ones because Carson Wentz has yet to really finish a season.
That's fair. So what pick in this draft are you guys the most excited about for Philly?
To me, it's Jalen Hurts. Like, I really think this kid's a better passer than people are giving him credit for. I think, to me, in college, he looked like a better passer than Lamar did at times. So, I think he's really underrated. And I think he really has a chance to be a legitimate quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, Chris, what is your answer to that question?
I actually like Kayvon Wallace. That's one of my favorite ones because they've desperately needed secondary help, and I think this will give them great secondary help. It was great at Clemson. Clemson's always had great defensive players come out, and I think this will give them young defense and improving secondary. I mean, they have Darius Slay now. You can add someone like Kayvon Wallace potentially year one, I think.
I thought that the value on the Kayvon Wallace pick was outstanding. The fact that they got him, early in the fourth round, a guy that could have gone in the third round, maybe even the second round on some people's boards. I really like the Kayvon Wallace pick. I think that he could be a solid player in that secondary for many years. I like that Philly pick. To me, was their best pick. I think Jalen Rager. I think is going to be a starter. I think you could see Kayvon Wallace being a starter. Those are the two people I feel the most comfortable with about this draft class for being long-term people for Philly. I'm not as on board about Jalen Hurts. Not as on board with Davion Taylor. And the receivers that they got late on day 3, I don't think that both of them are going to make it. I think that they're competing for one spot, potentially. So for me, Philly gets a B minus. I think that they have good pieces from this draft. I just think that they could have capitalized on better position, and I think that Hurts pick, although it could be interesting, it could hurt them down the stretch because I just think that you have a second round pick. Why are you going to use it on a guy that you definitely are not going to use as a starter? So what are your guys' grades for Philly for this draft?
I'll give him a solid B. I'll give him a solid B. I think they were able to. I think they got 2 legit starters out of this. They got some role players out of it. Again, like you said, Jalen Hurts, I think, is the question mark. Now, if somehow Carson Wentz gets hurt and Jalen Hurts is able to come in for maybe a little bit and show out, that could be trade bait potentially. That's potential.
Right.
You can get maybe some draft compensation back if he's able to maybe show out due to an injury to Carson Wentz.
Yeah. John, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think I would give them C plus. I think they didn't have a bad draft. They had a pretty good draft, not a great draft. I don't think they really addressed their need on defense, particularly at edge rusher. So I'll give them a C plus.
Yeah. So the next team we'll move to is the Dallas Cowboys. They will finish second in the NFC East. They wound up with the 17th overall pick, surprising a lot of teams early on day 1 with the selection of CeeDee Lamb. They get Trayvon Diggs and Neville Gallimore on day 2, 2 very solid picks that could have been day 1 picks. Earlier that could have been day 1 picks, and then you got some depth pieces in Tyler Biadasz, who could be the heir apparent to Travis Frederick on the offensive line, and Bradley Anae, also a very strong deep find on day 3. What do you guys think of Dallas's draft? Chris, we'll start with you.
I to be honest, I thought it was really, really, really good. Like they potentially drafted anywhere with maybe drafted 4 or 5 starters.
Yeah.
Like year 1 starters in their draft. But that's potentially like a bunch of starters you just drafted and they could be year 1 starters. They addressed corner, which is definitely what they needed. They needed to replace Byron Jones.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to address the center because Travis Frederick had to retire due to health issues. I mean, Bradley and Anae, that's a good pickup because uncertainty with Aldon Smith and Randy Gregory because of suspensions. So there's all that. I thought they addressed everything they needed, and that's why it was really good.
Yeah, I want to talk about their first 2 picks here, Whitley. So they get CeeDee Lamb in the first round, not their biggest need, but obviously at that point in the draft, probably the best player available. And then they get Trayvon Diggs, your boy, out of Alabama. So I want to talk about how Trayvon Diggs can fit with this team and how well CeeDee Lamb can fit with this team on the offensive side.
Yeah, so I really like what Dallas did. A lot of people had a first-round grade on Trayvon Diggs, and it's easy to see why. He's got good length, good athleticism. He does make some mistakes, but he's new to playing the position. So I think he's really picked up the quarterback position pretty quickly, and I think he really hasn't arrived as a player. I think he's going to continue to get better. So I think there's a lot of upside for him. And then, CeeDee Lamb is almost just like a extra pick, A lot of people had them picking Trayvon Diggs in the first round. So to be able to have one of the best players in the entire draft fall to you at CeeDee Lamb is huge, especially you can franchise tag Dak this year, and if he can't win with Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield, and then Zach Martin and Tyron Smith blocking for you, then it's like, when are you going to win? So I think Dallas absolutely killed it in the draft.
Yeah, they definitely gave Dak another option there. I think that CeeDee Lamb could I think it's a decent spot for him geography wise. I think he's from Texas. He's probably happy that he doesn't have to go too far to his first NFL home. But I worry for CeeDee Lamb in the fact that had he gone to 2 picks earlier to Denver, he would have been wide receiver 1. But now that he's in Dallas, I'm not so sure that he's even wide receiver 2 with Michael Gallup also there. And you obviously just signed Amari Cooper, so there's not a whole lot of the ceiling in Dallas for him is not as high as it is in other places. And that's what this draft is all about for the receivers. It wasn't necessarily about when they got drafted, it's where they got drafted to. And I think that CeeDee Lamb, although he's happy to be in Dallas, I think he's thinking a bit about, hey, maybe I could have been somewhere else and been wide receiver 1. To me, though, I think CeeDee Lamb could be a nice complement to Amari Cooper there in Dallas. I think that, I was concerned a little bit for Dallas because they had other needs at 17 that they needed to fulfill at, the edge position. They were looking to maybe even go corner, but they fulfilled those needs later in the draft. Which is why, which makes the CeeDee Lamb pick that much better, I think, because Bradley Anae went in the 5th round, could have gone as early as maybe the 3rd. Neville Gallimore went in the 3rd, could have easily gone in the 1st. Trayvon Diggs, a 2nd round pick, could have easily gone in the 1st as well. So I think they filled their needs and they did what they needed to do. So I'm really looking for Dallas. They have 4 or 5 potential starters. I really like what they've got going here.
Mm-hmm.
So what grade are you giving Dallas?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, it's just they have everything now. Like, they got the draft class. They've had a good free agency. I mean, if you can keep Dak and all, you can at least tag Dak. It's just like you have enough to be a Super Bowl contender. Mm-hmm. Now, can you follow through with that? Like, they haven't been able to do it in the past. Will they be able to do it this year?
I think some of that's going to come down to the coaching. They have the change from Jason Garrett to now Mike McCarthy, former Super Bowl winning coach. So, I think that is going to be the key here. He definitely has the pieces to do it. It's now about the coaches to execute the job. And for the players as well. But how well can they respond to the system Mike McCarthy is going to put in place? I like Dallas's draft. I'm going to give them an A-. I think they really got a lot of hits. They probably got more hits on their draft than majority of the teams out there. A- for me on the Cowboys. What do you guys think? Whitley, what do you?
Yeah, I would give Dallas an A+. I think they really their best case scenarios played out, and I think they had as good a draft as you could have possibly asked for or hoped for as a Dallas Cowboys fan.
An A+ from Whitley. Do we agree with that, Chris Wolf?
I'm gonna go A-.
A-.
Just for the reason I'm still a little worried about CeeDee Lamb because the Dallas Cowboys are actually more of a run-first team with Ezekiel Elliott. And then when you have potentially 2 receivers in front of CeeDee Lamb, he may not get as many touches. His production may not be as good as you would think it might be. That's why I give it a-. But I think he's a professional. I think he will be able to work through it. I just need to see it first. That's pretty much why I didn't give it a plus. I need to see him be able to fit with this team.
Yeah. Let's move on to the 3rd place team in the East this past season, the New York Giants. They started off the draft with somewhat of a surprise, a small surprise is what I'll call it. Not really a surprise, though, to me, by taking, in my opinion, the best tackle in the draft in Andrew Thomas. They got a solid player on day 2 in Xavier McKinney from Alabama, and they really stocked up on defense in the later rounds. They had, I believe, they had 7 picks on day 3, 6 of them on the defensive side of the ball. They did not draft any skill players at wide receiver, tight end, or running back. They got only defensive players and offensive line. So, um, got I'll start with you, Chris. What did you think of the Andrew Thomas pick and New York's draft class as a whole?
The Andrew Thomas pick was actually really good. You could go either way with Isaiah Simmons or Andrew Thomas. I think they chose to protect their franchise running back and franchise quarterback, which I think is obviously the best decision because you spent top 6 picks on those 2 guys. You need to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
And as a whole, I think it's a pretty solid draft. I mean, obviously they definitely like linebacker. They definitely love linebacker and offensive linemen. Like linebacker is their favorite. They drafted, I believe,
They drafted 3 linebackers and an edge rusher in Carter Coughlin in the 7th. They had 4 7th-round picks, to be fair. 4 7th-round picks. So they had a lot of picks, and they utilized that to fulfill some depth on the defensive side of the ball. But their top defensive pick, Xavier McKinney, John Whitley, he was probably the best player available coming in on day 2, and the Giants snagged him pretty early. What are your thoughts on McKinney and his fit in the Giants defense?
Yeah, McKinney, I like the kid. He's more of a classic safety. You can't put him back there in single high and expect him to cover the field, which I think is really what you want in a modern day safety. He's closer to more of a Landon Collins, so I think it's a good pick. I think there's a reason he did fall to the 2nd round, but ultimately where you got him, I think that's a great value.
Yeah, I think part of that is because where the safety position is going, it doesn't necessarily fit what Xavier McKinney's skill set is, which doesn't necessarily make Xavier McKinney a bad player. It just means that, and the thing is, none of the safeties went on day 1. So I don't think it was necessarily just Xavier McKinney. I think it was just the safety position as a whole, and teams looking more towards wide receivers rather than any other position. Because look, I mean, if you look at the day 1 draft, there were 6 receivers that went day 1. There were probably either 4 quarterbacks. It was more of an offensive draft on day 1, I think. And corners is what the defensive side of the ball was looking for, not necessarily safety. So I don't think it was necessarily a slight against Xavier McKinney. I think it was a slight against the entire safety class, which Xavier McKinney was the lead of. I think that Xavier McKinney, I do like the Landon Collins comp. They had Landon Collins for several years, and eventually it worked. It didn't work out in New York for Landon Collins, but they needed to address that position. They did that early. I'm glad they did that. Look, this Giants team is not going to compete for a Super Bowl this year, but they definitely. I think Andrew Thomas was necessary. They made that pick. I like what they did. They addressed the defensive side of the ball in free agency, and they got the depth in the later parts of the draft, especially with Darnay Holmes at corner, Carter Coughlin at edge. I think was a steal in the 7th. They could have some solid pieces from this draft. I think Andrew Thomas is a hit. I think Xavier McKinney could be a starter for them, for the next several seasons. That's 2 players that I think for sure will be long-term starters. I'm not sold on the rest of the class, but I think there are some, players there that could help them, at least in the short term, for special teams and such. So, for me, I'm going to give the Giants a B, because I'm not blown away by this draft, but I also think they have pieces that they can, build upon from this 2020 class. What did you guys think, Whitley? I'll go to you for the grade.
Yeah, I'll give them a solid B-. I think they did what they had to do, but like you said, it wasn't a draft class that particularly blows you away.
Right. Chris, what do you think?
I give it a B-. They hit on the first two picks, and then after that, it was like those are project people.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of projects after the first 2 picks, but they can end up panning out. So I'll give it. I think they did pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good.
Yeah, and we're gonna round out the NFC East here with the with Washington. They had the second overall pick, a no-brainer there by taking Chase Young out of Ohio State. They didn't have a second round pick, but in on day three they went for Sadiq Charles to be their replacement for Trent Williams, who they also traded on day three. Antonio Gandy Golden out of Liberty was their next fourth round pick. They got a lot of depth guys on day three, but obviously with Chase Young, this draft class is a success for Washington. John Whitley, what do you think about Chase Young?
Absolutely. I think they got the best player in the entire draft right here at his size and athleticism, and like as far as his skill set, I really don't think he's come close to reaching his ceiling yet. I think he's good with his hands for an edge rusher, but he can still add a few moves to his arsenal, and he knows that. So I think this kid, if I had to pick one player from this draft class to become a Hall of Famer, it'd be Chase Young.
Yeah. And Chris, is there a depth piece from Washington's draft that you think could be like a steal or a sleeper pick that is going to be successful in Washington down the line?
I think Antonio Gandy Golden's going to be because he had an outstanding season last year. People thought he'd make it. Maybe he could have been a third round pick. Maybe he could have been a third round pick. I think getting him in the fourth round, I think that's a steal. Get you another weapon. They love the Antonios because they got two Antonios at wide receiver.
Yep. Antonio Gibson from Memphis and Antonio Gandy Golden from Liberty.
So yeah, I think both of them could be because Antonio Gibson is a good one because he's also a very, very good return man as well. He returned kicks, so that gives them another special teams weapon.
Right. I talked about this with you guys, or at least I brought this up at some point. I said that Washington was the best place to go for receivers that wanted to succeed right away because their receivers in 2019, it was a very thin wide receiver room. So getting Antonio Gandy Golden, he's probably real happy that he's standing there in Washington. Also, someone that I think could stand out from this class, it actually comes from an undrafted group. Thaddeus Moss from LSU. I think that he went undrafted. I think there were some concerns with injuries when it came to him. However, I think that Washington got a real nice get from the undrafted signings with Thaddeus Moss, especially considering they need tight end help with with a lot of uncertainties. With that group, Jordan Reed now no longer with the team, and Vernon Davis retiring. So there's a need at tight end that maybe Thaddeus Moss could fill for next season and in years to come. I think that I think Washington, it's Ron Rivera's first draft. I think the defense is actually going to start coming together with Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne. I think that it's finally going to come into fruition. The offense is what they needed to fix, and I think that they got some pieces. I'm not totally sold on all the pieces they got. I think they'd be lucky if one of those Antonios worked out. So I'm gonna give Washington a B minus just because I feel like outside of Chase Young, there's no slam dunk guarantees out of this draft class. But Chase Young brings them from probably a failing grade to a B minus. That's the kind of impact he can have. So, Chris, what is your grade for Washington?
I'm gonna give them a B because obviously Chase Young, probably the best player in the draft. I think both wide receivers are gonna at least make an impact. I think Gandy Gold will be more of like the traditional wide receiver. I think Antonio Gibson's gonna be in the special teams. I think he's gonna make an impact there. My one concern is Sadiq Charles. He's had a lot of disciplinary issues at LSU, his whole career at LSU. So he has a good talent, but disciplinary issues is also something that can raise an eyebrow at some organizations and kind of, are you worth it? are not. You're really here to probably replace Trent Williams. So it's like you're going to need to show us the whole training camp through mini camp if they have it, training camp that you can consistently be on good behavior.
Yeah, Whitley, give them a grade.
Yeah, I might give them a B plus. Like I said, they got the best player in the draft. I think they got two really good values at receiver with the Antonios. And then Sadiq Charles, I don't like that pick, like you said, Chris, because like he's had a history of multiple disciplinary problems. And when it's once, you can look past it, but when it's repeated offenses, then that's gonna be hard to correct, especially when you get to the professional level and you have less regimen and less discipline and you're more on your own. So I'll give him a B plus.
Right. Now, Whitley, we're going to move on to the Packers here. Obviously probably one of the more surprising picks of the draft by taking Jordan Love, 26th overall. And then they go out and they work on most of their picks were on offense. They get A.J. Dillon in the second round at Boston College. They get some pieces for their offensive line. John Runyon in the 6th, Jake Hansen in the 6th, Simon Stepaniak in the 6th, but no wide receivers. Can you explain the logic behind that decision?
I don't know that I can. I really don't know that I can. I think, wide receiver was our biggest need. And I wasn't necessarily somebody who thought we had to pick a wide receiver in the first round because we have Devontae Adams. But we need a guy who can be a solid number 2, and we don't have that on our roster right now. So to not pick a receiver at all is a little nutty to me.
Especially considering how strong this receiver class was. You'd think that at least with one of their 9 picks that they would have taken a receiver with just one of them. They opted not to, especially in with this strong receiver class. But what did you think about the Jordan Love pick? I know that you said at the beginning of the podcast you were not in love with the pick, but now that you've accepted the fact that he is the Green Bay Packers backup quarterback, what did you think? What do you think about him now?
Yeah, you know what? I like the guy. I'm gonna support him. I would even call myself a fan of Jordan Love, but I still just don't like the pick. I don't love the pick because here's the thing. This guy, people compare it to when we picked Aaron Rodgers, but the difference is like a lot of people had Aaron Rodgers as the best quarterback in that draft class. Nobody has Jordan Love as the best quarterback in this draft class. He's the 4th best quarterback in this draft class.
In a weak quarterback class, too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I really feel like we have Rodgers on contract for the next 4 years. You can't tell me in the next 4 years there's not going to be a guy that we like just as much as him. So we couldn't have, got a Patrick Queen, made our defense more stout. I like A.J. Dillon in the second round, go receiver in the 3rd round. I'm not one of the people who thought we had to go receiver in the 1st round, but like at the same time, I don't think we got better in this draft.
Yeah, we were talking about, how you were thinking that they could have gone running back in the 1st round. So they definitely addressed that need with A.J. Dillon. I like the pick of A.J. Dillon. In fact, it's probably my favorite pick out of any of these for Green Bay. I think that, Jamal Williams has just 1 year left on his deal. Maybe what they see in A.J. Dillon is they see him more as a receiving back, and they could see him kind of like a Duke Johnson, maybe. I mean, the size I believe is definitely there when you think about A.J. Dillon. Maybe he's not necessarily. I'm pretty sure in college he was seen more as a runner. Yeah, he had 1,685 yards in his last season at Boston College with just 13 receptions. So, I mean, maybe they see Aaron Jones takes more of a receiving role in that offense, take a little bit of pressure off of him by throwing A.J. Dillon in there. But yeah, it's a little bit confusing. Maybe you would think that they go for like a receiving back even, but they didn't. Josiah DeGuara, their 3rd round pick, is probably the closest thing to any kind of receiver in the class at tight end, the tight end from Cincinnati. But even then, no true receivers. But Chris, what grade are you going to give Green Bay here?
I'm gonna give it a C minus. I don't really see a lot of like value in a lot of these picks, except maybe AJ Dillon. I'm talking like short term, like the near term. I could see AJ Dillon. I could see DeGarwa. I could see both of them being impacts pretty early because obviously Jimmy Graham left Green Bay, so they needed tight end. They needed some tight end help, and he was actually really good at Cincinnati. Like statistically one of their best tight ends in school history. So, and that's a school that Travis Kelce went to. So, I mean,
Whitley, last thoughts on the Packers.
Yeah, I do like in the 6th round they grabbed 3 offensive linemen, and I think that's the position that they develop better than anything. So I think out of those 3 guys, one of them is going to turn out to be a really, really good player. Ultimately, though, I'm going to give the Packers a D just because you didn't do anything that's going to get you over the hump of the 49ers where we got stuck last year. So ultimately, it's a D.
Yeah, a D is probably where I would go here. In fact, I can't see. Maybe they have something in Kamal Martin or Jonathan Garvin at the linebacker spots because they did lose some linebacker depth this year. But the thing is, it's not a good thing when you see the day 3 guys as your most likely players to hit and be long-term guys for you. That's never a good thing. So for me, a D for Green Bay is where I'm going to go with. So now let's move on to Minnesota, who had the largest draft class out of anybody. I believe they had 15 picks in the draft, a big draft class for them. They started off with 2 first-round picks. They get Justin Jefferson from LSU and Jeff Gladney from TCU. Like Ezra Cleveland late in the 2nd, probably they could have got probably a great spot for them considering Ezra Cleveland was mocked in the 1st round or late in the mock draft process. And a lot of depth guys at a lot of different positions. They drafted receivers, they drafted corners, they drafted safeties, they drafted edge guys, 3 edge guys on day 3. They got a backup quarterback, they got a guard, a tackle. They really checked off every piece. But Chris, could a large draft class be a bad thing possibly?
Yeah, it could go either way, I think, because if let's just say none of them pan out, that doesn't look so good on you. It's like someone's like, oh, your draft class wasn't good. However, if it does if a lot of these players pan out, it's a huge plus because they're not making much money on these little deals. So you're gonna get at least 3-4 years of low pay for a lot of players having a big draft class if it pans out. To be honest, I love the Vikings draft class. I thought they hit on a lot of picks.
Yeah, so look, 15 draft picks is a lot. They're not going to be able to sign every one of them. Chances are, I would say probably half of them make the team. Which, to cut 7 draft picks from one draft is pretty excessive. I'm sure they tried to trade some of these pieces to move up or try to trade some of these, to a future draft. But, look, if you're Kenny Willekes, you're the 3rd edge player that was chosen, you're not super happy because you're the 3rd guy. He's the 3rd edge guy they picked on day 3. So the chances of him making the team, he's not only does he have to beat the incumbents, but he has to beat the 2 players that were drafted ahead of him. So I think those are the bigger losers in this draft than anybody is the guys like Brian Cole, who was the 5th secondary guy taken by the Vikings in this draft. He's probably not going to make the roster. I think what the Minnesota draft should be looked at more so, rather than just the big, shocking, 15 picks. They got some real strong pieces early in this draft. I think Justin Jefferson has the potential to be a big to just plug right away, and he can take off. And Minnesota can be exactly where they were with Stephon Diggs. That's the trade. That's the pick that they got in the Stephon Diggs trade, and they used it to basically, plug it right back in with Justin Jefferson, to fill Stephon Diggs' void in that offense. But Whitley, what is your favorite pick from Minnesota's draft?
Yeah, I like the third-round corner, Cameron
Dantzler.
Yeah, I like him out of Mississippi State. He's long. He's got good size that he's gone against great competition in college. I think. And I also they were saying that he's the guy that Jamar Chase, actually struggled the most against. Because, Minnesota had to address corner in this draft. So to get Gladney in the first round and then grab this guy in the third round, ultimately that's what's going to make or break their draft class is if they can get one or both those guys to pan out.
Absolutely. And arguably corner was their biggest need in the draft. They lost their top 3 corners this season. So they definitely needed to address the corner position, and they did that early in this draft by getting both Gladney and Dantzler. I think both of them could be starters for the Vikings moving forward. I really like both of those picks. For me, Minnesota walks away from this draft with an A-. I think that they have a handful of players that could pan out for them, including DJ Wanham from South Carolina. Given that Everson Griffin is no longer on the team, they need some help at the edge position. He provides that. Cameron Dantzler, I think, is a great day 2 pick for them as well. Ezra Cleveland could be a starter as well. And of course, the round 1 picks with Jefferson and Gladney, their top 5 picks could easily be starters for them long term. I really like this from Minnesota, an A- for the Vikings. Chris, what did you tab them as?
I give them an A. They addressed everything. They got Diggs replacement. They were able to potentially get 2 replacements in Datzler and Gladney of Trey Waynes and Rhodes. You were able to get Ertz at Cleveland. You can never go wrong with having more offensive linemen, and he could potentially fill one of those roles. And I like their day 3 picks were pretty good too. I mean, James Lynch out of Baylor. I mean, he was AP. He was first team All-American this year. I mean, this last year. I mean, he was a force on the pass rush, which they're going to need because Everson Griffin's not coming back. So they're going to need a little bit more pass rushing. That's what you get with like Warnham and Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, I also like Troy Dye out of Oregon. That's a good pick for them. I mean, he led the team in tackles all 4 seasons, had nearly 400 tackles in his career. So he knows where the ball is at all times. Gives you a good tackler, a good young linebacker, and a linebacking core that is so, but it's still pretty solid.
Mm-hmm. And Whitley, what are we giving them? Are we giving an A? A is across the board.
I'm gonna give them a B plus. I think it's great because you address the corner, which was their biggest need, and then you got the best playmaker on the board in Justin Jefferson. But I think ultimately it's really gonna come down to if these corners pan out, and I think corner is maybe the hardest position to scout in the entire draft. So I'm not ready to toot their horn just yet. Let's see how these corners pan out.
Yeah. I'm sure Vikings fans will give you bad grades on Rate My Professor. But let's move on to the Chicago Bears, a team that did not have a first-round pick, still giving picks to the Raiders for the Khalil Mack trade. But they had 2 seconds, and they used one on Cole Kmet from Notre Dame, a tight end, who was their 10th tight end on the roster when he was drafted, and Jalen Johnson, a corner out of Utah, some thought could be a late first-rounder. A very interesting draft from Chicago. They only had the 2 second-round picks were their only selections before the 5th round, where they got 3 5ths and 2 7ths. What did you think, Whitley, about the Bears draft?
Yeah, you just went out and signed Jimmy Graham, and then you go and draft Cole Kent. What are you doing? I mean, you got 10 tight ends on the roster. What are you doing, Chicago?
Yeah, I found that pick just as puzzling as you did. The Bears, I think the Bears had a really good free agency, and I think they needed to have one because they knew that their picks in the 2020 draft were limited. But they did go out and now the tight ends on their roster. I would assume Cole Kmet is probably look. Jimmy Graham's there for 2 years. Can't imagine he's there longer than that. In fact, I'd be surprised if Jimmy Graham lasted longer than this year. Clearly, they like Cole Kmet. If they had all these tight ends on the draft on the roster and they still took him, to me that shows that they really wanted him and they saw him as the best player available. They see him as a guy that could be a huge receiving threat for them. Probably what Jimmy Graham was back in his prime. I think though, they didn't need to address the linebacker position. They had Khalil Mack, they have Roquan Smith, they have Robert Quinn. But I'm surprised that they didn't look after the offensive line a little bit more, considering how ineffective their running game was, and how how Mitch Trubisky was kind of forced into making poor throws a lot. That they didn't address that earlier in the draft. They got they got 2 late round picks, Arlington Hambright from Colorado and Latavius Simmons from Tennessee State, but they didn't address it earlier enough in the draft, and I think ultimately that's what's going to hurt them with this class. I'm not a huge fan of this draft class. It didn't really satisfy a large amount of what the team needed. So for me, Chicago starts with a C, and so does their draft class. A C for me for Chicago. Chris Wolf, you also start with a C. What are you gonna give them?
I'm gonna give them a. I'm debating him. I'll be generous and give him a C minus. I was getting close to a D plus. Be generous, give him a C minus because I believe the first 2 picks will be good in the future. Like I think Cole Kmet he'll be the starter in a couple of years. I just did not like the pick this time because you have 10 tight ends now. I mean, that's a lot especially for a tight end. Like you're only going to keep maybe 2 on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's a lot. Jalen Johnson is easily the best pick they had because that's a cover corner. He's a lockdown corner. He potentially good in that first round. You snagged them in the middle of the middle of the second, and I think that was probably their best pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Whitley, this draft as a Packers fan should make you feel really good. What is your grade that you're giving in Chicago?
It does, because they didn't go out and get better. Because of your limited draft capital, this did not need to be the year you got the tight end of the future, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And, you didn't address the offensive line. Honestly, I think they would have been better off taking a quarterback than Cole Kmet, but just because, you have 10 tight ends on the roster. Yeah, you have 2 quarterbacks that have been starters, but neither of them are the long-term solution. So, frankly, I'm going to give Chicago an F.
An F.
Yeah, well, I don't see any reason not to. I don't see anything that doesn't make
our first failing grade of the draft right now. It goes to the Chicago Bears. Congratulations. But let's move on to the final team in the NFC North, the Detroit Lions. They started off the draft really strong by taking Jeff Okudah, number 3 overall. In the second round, they go out. They get arguably the best running back in the draft by taking DeAndre Swift, 35th overall. And then, they got some solid day 3 selections, with Quintez Cephas out of Wisconsin. Doesn't have to move too far for his NFL career. They also get Hunter Bryant, one of the top tight ends in undrafted free agency. I thought that was one of the better undrafted free agency pickups, especially for a team like Detroit that is in need of a tight end. So, Chris, what did you think of Detroit's draft?
I thought to be honest, it was probably the second best in this division. Like, it was really good.
Well, I mean, considering the fact that they didn't have a whole lot, that's a pretty low bar. I mean, to get just second, but they passed it. They cleared it.
Yeah, they were able to replace Darius Slay with Jeff Okudah. I believe he'll be able to go in there and fill in pretty nicely. It should be a nice fit for him. DeAndre Swift, I think that was a must with uncertainty at running backs. I mean, they were flip flopping the backfield for the last couple of years. They've been flip flopping it. So getting potentially getting your guy that will be the future, that was a good second round pick. And I think the third one too. I mean, getting Aquara off the edge, that's a good edge rusher in the third round. I thought that was a nice pickup as well. And obviously, you said Hunter Bryant. He may be he could potentially be tight end too after Hawkinson.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. I think I like what Detroit did with their draft. Obviously, when you get Jeff Okudah, the best corner in the draft, that definitely helps, especially considering the fact that outside of Darius Slade, that secondary was not good last year. And they've made the acquisitions to where they can, improve that secondary, and I think that Jeff Okudah is probably the best one out of that bunch. But Whitley, other than Jeff Okudah, what was your favorite pick in this draft for Detroit?
I think the DeAndre Swift pick was really good, just because the kid's got a chance to be a star. You need another playmaker in that offense, simply because it lacks a lot of splash plays. So I think that was the best pick on the board. I really like beefing up the offensive line in the third and fourth round with Jonah Jackson and Logan Sternberg, especially Jonah Jackson. I think he's going to be a really good pro.
Right. Yeah, and with DeAndre Swift, the running backs in Detroit last year really suffered because Kerryon Johnson just couldn't find a way to stay healthy. They kind of went with just a committee towards the end of the season. Wes Hills, Ty Johnson, Bo Scarborough were all, trying to keep the ship afloat, but it wasn't as strong and as sturdy of a solution as DeAndre Swift. And I honestly think that DeAndre Swift could, swiftly take Kerryon Johnson's starting spot and immediately just run with it. I don't think DeAndre Swift is the kind of guy that you put in a committee. I think he's the guy that you put on there for 3 downs, and you have him get you have him get 10 yards every series, and you get the first down. He's the kind of guy that you can, run down another team's throat. And I think that I think that was a really good pick. It takes some pressure off of Matt Stafford, someone who is approaching, the fourth quarter of his career is what I'm going to call it. I think that and it's an all Georgia backfield now with Stafford and Swift. So I think that Detroit gets a B+ for me. I'm not totally blown away by this draft. Obviously, you get Okudah, who's going to be a long-term starter for them. DeAndre Swift has the potential to be a long-term starter. I think Jonah Jackson also has the potential to be a starter for them moving forward. So I'm going to give them a B+. Now, Whitley, what are you going to give the Lions?
I'm gonna give them a solid C. It was a very safe draft for the Lions. Personally,
Yeah.
I think that's why
Safe.
I think that's why they haven't really gotten anywhere, though, is because they make the safe picks every year, and I think they should have risked the greatness and picked Tua. Give yourself a chance to move forward as a franchise. But that's why they're the Detroit Lions, and that's why they're gonna stay a mediocre franchise for years to come.
Yeah. Chris, what are you saying?
I'll give them a solid B-. Give them a B-. I like their early on picks, like with Okudah, Swift, Okora, and Jonah Jackson. Those were the first 4 picks were on them. I think pretty much on money. I think those were as good as you can get. After that, it was like, okay, they're solid. Maybe not. Maybe late maybe a few of them maybe late roster picks, but I don't really see many of them making the roster after those 4 potentially. So, but because of the quality of their first 4 picks, I'm going to give them B-.
Right. So let's move on to the NFC South, where the division champs from this past season, the New Orleans Saints, had the smallest draft class out of any team in the NFL. Just 4 picks for them, including only 1 pick on day 3, getting Tommy Stevens, a backup quarterback for them, who is the 4th best quarterback on this roster. But they get Cesar Ruiz in round 1, which was a big head scratcher at the time. Considering the fact that New Orleans had other needs. They take Zach Bond in the 3rd round with the 74th pick, and they take Adam Troutman in the 3rd round with the 105th pick. So not a whole lot to talk about here with the Saints. But, I mean, what do we think about the Saints draft? Chris, what do you think?
It was I mean, for the 4 picks, it was okay. I mean, the Cesar Ruiz, I mean, you could... Again, never go wrong with offensive linemen. I mean, you had Max Unger retire a little bit ago, and in center position, I mean, it's always great to have another backup center because that means if he needs to be backup now, he can also play guard, so he can move around. So he could potentially get time this year. The Zach Bond one was probably the best one. They were in need of linebacker, and it's a good pickup for linebacker. The only one I was kind of confused about was Tommy Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
Like
they traded back into the 7th to get him.
I don't get that. I mean, you have Breeze, you have Winston as the traditional backup quarterback.
Well, they didn't have Winston at the time. They did sign Winston. And breaking news here, guys, Taysom Hill will be considered a tight end in flex position in fantasy this season. So that, I mean... Look, and Tommy Stevens, though, is considered to be similar to what Taysom Hill is. He can play special teams. He can play, you can throw him out at the tight end position if you want. I think that's ultimately why you get Tommy Stevens, though. But clearly, the fact that they got Jameis Winston, it makes me think that that's who they are going to be relying on after Drew Brees retires. And Taysom Hill... they gave him a huge extension. So maybe the Tommy Stevens pick was some insurance. Maybe, long-term they'll use him. But to me, I see this draft as Ruiz, Bond, and Troutman. And I think that, if you have 3 picks in a draft, you better hope all of them hit. I think that Ruiz can be a solid starter down the road for them. They need to trade or release Larry Warford or let him play out his contract in order for that to happen. But I think Ruiz has potential to be a long-term starter for them. I think Zach Bond was their best value pick at 74. He could be a starter, I think, as early as this season. And Adam Troutman, the Saints did need tight end help this season. Jared Cook is not going to be there much longer. If he's even there this season. So Troutman was a good move if you're looking long-term for Jared Cook. But to me, Jared Cook just turned 33. I think if he's there past 2020, I'll be surprised. But yeah, that's what I have to say about New Orleans. Whitley, anything to add?
Yeah, I always scratch my head a little when I see a center picked in the 1st round. I don't really think you should pick any interior offensive lineman in 1st round unless you're sure it's a Zach Martin or a Quentin Nelson.
Yeah.
But I love the Zach Bond pick. I think he's going to be a great pro for years to come. And then as far as Tommy Stevens, I'm not going to overly scrutinize a 7th round pick when it's I'm not going to overly scrutinize any 7th round pick.
And quick little note, Chris, they got your boy Calvin Throckmorton in undrafted free agency.
That's a good man. I think it's a good pickup. He was 3rd-team All-American this year. It was this last season, so it's a solid pickup in undrafted free agency.
Yeah, I think. Look, the benefit of not having any 3rd-round picks is the fact that you can look at undrafted free agency a little early. I think that Joe Backey from Michigan State, they got in undrafted free agency. One of the better players that went undrafted. I think he could actually be a long-term option for them as well. I think that he's probably the best. He was probably, in my opinion, the best undrafted free agent available, and he goes to New Orleans, a team that needed linebacker help that didn't really address it He's a middle linebacker, someone who could possibly take over for like Demario Davis one day. They need a guy like that. So I'm glad that they went out and they got a guy like that. So for me, I would consider him as one of their draft picks. So I'm gonna give the Saints. A C minus, just because I feel like they didn't do a whole lot with this draft class that they could have done. They had very few picks to begin with, but they didn't do. Look, they better hope all three of these picks pan out. And I don't think that there's a guarantee that Ruiz pans out. I don't think there's a guarantee that Troutman pans out. I think Zach Bond's the best pick in this draft, but for me, a C minus is where I'm going with the Saints. Whitley, what are you going to give him?
Yeah, I'm also going to give him a C minus. I think it could be lower, but like you said, I think the Zach Bond pick kind of puts him even.
Right. And Chris Wolf, what are we thinking?
I'm gonna go with average. And this is an average C. I mean, they didn't amaze me, but they didn't pick bad. They didn't pick poorly. They were just kind of like there. There were picks that could pan out, could not, but but a couple of them were needs, like Adam Rotman and Bond were needs. So you pick 2 out of 4 needs. I think those 2 will be pretty good. Ruiz, I'm still kind of like up in the air on, so that's why I'm gonna give it a C.
Yeah, and we'll now move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They had the 14th pick, but they traded up one spot to ensure that they drafted Tristan Wirfs with the 13th pick. Very, very solid pick there. They also got Antoine Winfield in the second round, one of the better players to come out of the day one undrafted. And then they got they got some skill positions in the third round with Keyshawn Vaughn, 1,000-yard rusher from Vanderbilt. They get Tyler Johnson from Minnesota in the 5th. To me, Tampa Bay, they got what they needed at tackle. And I think the fact that they got Tristan Wirfs, who is a top 2 tackle for me in this draft class, puts that after that pick, Tampa Bay was happy with their draft. What do you think, Chris?
I think their draft class was like really. I thought it was really good. I mean, obviously getting Tristan Wirfs, trading up from, we actually were able to find out like by day 3 why they traded up, because now we know, because the Niners knew that Joe Staley was going to retire, so they wanted to get in front of them because they may have wanted to get Tristan Wirfs because they didn't think it was going to fall. Though now we know that they were set on Trent Williams. But I actually really love their second, third. I actually like their second, third, and 5th rounders a lot. Antoine Winfield, I actually thought he was the best safety in there. I actually had him as my best safety in this draft class. Like, he could play both safety and corner. He's a ball hawker, like a lot, like what people need. He had 7 INTs this last season. So, he's a ball hawker. He knows where to get to the ball. I thought Keyshawn Vaughn's a solid running back. I mean, 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC is pretty good because you're going up against great defenses. And Tyler Johnson is a very underrated pick because you get another pretty big wide receiver. It's 6'2", 205 pounds. He could play in the slot. That's where he was actually his most effective, was in the slot in Minnesota, which is actually a spot where they kind of were thin at. So he can fill that void in the slot and give Tom Brady, just a bunch of big targets to throw to.
Yeah, I think that Tampa's draft was really about those top 2 picks with Wirfs, who will start right away, and Antoine Winfield, who I also believe will start right away. John Whitley, what is your favorite pick from Tampa's draft?
Yeah, my favorite pick is the Antoine Winfield. Like Chris said, I think he's really what you want in a modern day safety. You can put him single high, you can cover the whole field. He's a ball hawk. Ultimately, my only problem with this Tampa Bay draft is I wish they could have addressed the running back position a little better. I don't think Keyshawn Vaughn is anything better than what they've got now. But besides that, good draft for Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so Keyshawn Vaughn, he was taken with the 76th pick in the draft. Zach Moss went 86th to Buffalo, just 8 picks later. Then Darrington Evans went 93rd to Tennessee. He'll be Derrick Henry's backup next season. And then in the 4th round, Joshua Kelly went to the Chargers. What running back? I mean, it could be anyone that I just listed or anyone else, Whitley. But what running back would you have preferred Tampa to take instead of Keyshawn Vaughn?
I think ultimately, I think Zach Moss higher upside, but ultimately, I think they probably would have had to not go Winfield or trade up to address it better. But I think Zach Moss has I don't think we're going to see Keyshawn Vaughn even really get carries right away. I think Zach Moss is a guy that we could at least see get in the mix right away.
Yeah, Ronald Jones will probably be the primary guy in that backfield for Tom Brady. But I mean, if you look at the running backs for them right now, they also got Raymond Calais in the 7th round. He's from Louisiana Lafayette. He had 886 yards in his senior season, so maybe he's the guy. I know he's a return man, so maybe that's where they were thinking by drafting him. But to me, I think Ronald Jones is the answer still. I don't think he was given too much of a chance with Peyton Barber there. And look, Ronald Jones is only in his 3rd season, so I think there's still room for improvement with Ronald Jones. He had 724 yards last season and 300 receiving yards. So with over 1,000 yards from scrimmage from Ronald Jones last season, I expect that number to increase in 2020. So I don't know if running back was their biggest need. Keyshawn Vaughn can certainly be a running back too. So that's where I'm at with Tampa and Keyshawn Vaughn. But overall, I'm going to give Tampa a B because I really like what they did with Wirfs and Winfield. Both of those guys, I'm sure, will be hits for them. Other than that, I can't really see. I'm not certain about the other 5 draft picks that they got. So that's what hinders them from being an A. But for me, Tampa is a solid B with Wirfs and Winfield, 2 guys that are going to be starters for them for a long time, in my opinion. So, Whitley, what are you going to give the Bucks?
Yeah, I'm going to give them a B as well. They did what they needed to. I think, you get a better running back. That's what puts you over to an A, but right now you're sitting at a B.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, what are you thinking?
We're going to go 3 for 3.
Yeah.
Give him a B. I really like the first 2 picks. I think Tyler Johnson's going to be a wild card for them. I think he's going to be a good slot for them. And I think that was a solid 5th rounder. I mean, maybe potentially get your best slot receiver in the 5th round would be pretty good.
Right. Now we move on to the Atlanta Falcons, who actually did finish 2nd in this division. Probably should have gone to them before Tampa. But anyway, Atlanta went out and they addressed their cornerback position first. There was talks about them trading up into that top 10 to maybe go and get Jeff Okudah or C.J. Henderson. But ultimately they settled with A.J. Terrell from Clemson with the 16th overall pick. They get Marlon Davidson on day 2 with the 47th pick. Matt Hennessy also on day 2 at the center position. They get a lot of depth pieces on day 3 with Michael Walker, Jalen Hawkins, and then they get their punter for the future possibly in Sterling Hoffrichter. But, not a whole lot of things stand out from this Atlanta draft. But, Chris, what was your favorite pick from the Falcons?
To be honest, I actually really like the Marlon Davidson pick.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good pick because some people had him in the draft board as a first rounder, late first rounder. Some people on the draft board did, and I'm at what 47. So I think that was a very good pick. I mean, he was very good next to Derek Brown, which he went top 10. So I think I think that I feel like that was the best one because they need pass rush help, and he's also very big, over 300 pounds. He played DE. He played defensive end at over 300 pounds. I mean, that's very tough. He
Yeah.
might have to go to tackle. He may have to go to tackle to start, but I
Put him
think
next to
that
Grady
I like
Jarrett.
that.
I think that's their plan. I think they're going to move him inside to the tackle position, get him next to Grady Jarrett. I mean, he could play defensive end, but they also got Dante Fowler, so maybe Dante Fowler goes and plays defensive end. I think though that despite getting Marlon Davidson, they are still going to be looking for pass rush. Jadeveon Clowney is still out there in free agency. Everson Griffin is still a free agent, so maybe he's the answer for them. I don't know if they've done enough to satisfy that pass rush. But Whitley, what do you think about Atlanta's draft? What did they not address that you wish they had?
What did they not address? I think it's tough to say because I think the Falcons are kind of a mystery team where it's really hard to pinpoint why they're not good. I think ultimately they could have used a better safety over the top. I think Winfield would have been a really great fit for them. Ultimately, I do really like the Matt Hennessy pick. I think Alex Mack is getting old, so to get a good plug and play center was good. But ultimately, I think they could have addressed the safety position a little better.
Right. Alex Mack turns 35 in November, so definitely look towards the future for that. With safeties, they got Jalen Hawkins on day 3 with the 4th round pick. I think that had they had maybe an extra third, maybe they would have gone out and they would have gotten a safety. I really like the AJ Terrell pick though. I think he was definitely a top 3 corner in this draft, and that was reflected on his draft position. And corner is definitely probably their top position they needed to address. I'm glad they did that here with AJ Terrell. I think that he's going to be a starter right away opposite Isaiah Oliver for a secondary that probably that needs a lot of help, and he will be able to hopefully be that guy. And excuse me from what I said earlier, Matt Bosher no longer with the Falcons. It's Ryan Allen, who was originally the Patriots punter until last season. So maybe it's Ryan Allen's time to leave Atlanta. I don't know. The thing is they had an extra second. But they traded it to Baltimore to get Hayden Hurst. So maybe that pick could have gone out and they could have gotten a safety. But I think Atlanta's draft it still leaves some holes, and I think that it's really going to come down though to the players that were on the team before the draft. They had a good second half of the season last year, but I think that Atlanta for me gets a C plus just because I feel like AJ Terrell is a starter, and Matt Hennessy will be a starter in the future. I just don't think that they're going to. I just don't think the depth pieces are super strong there. Marlon Davidson too could be a starter, but I'm not certain. I think there's still a lot of holes in this team, so a C plus is what I do.
I'd probably give it a C plus. I like their first 2 picks, but actually first 3 picks. I just think, like you said, too many holes. Secondary still has holes. They still may have some holes on the O line. Defensive ends holes. Because remember that offensive line gave up 48 sacks. That Matt Ryan got sacked 48 times, tied for most in the league. So you definitely need to revamp that offensive line. They could have done better. They did get Hennessy, but they could have done better on that as well.
Yeah, Whitley, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm gonna go C minus. I don't love the AJ Terrell pick at 16. I get you needed a corner; he's a good corner, but I think you very likely could have gotten him in the second round, if not an equally graded corner in the second round. So I don't love this draft, but you know what? You did address most of your needs, so C minus.
Right. So let's move on to the Carolina Panthers. So Matt Rule, probably one of the most offensive-minded head coaches in the league, did something unprecedented. He drafted only defensive players in his first draft as head coach. He goes for Derek Brown in the first round, gets Yetur Gross-Matos with the 38th pick early in the second, gets Jeremy Chin late in the second. That was their day two. On day three, they went out. They addressed the secondary by getting Troy Pride from Notre Dame, Kenny Robinson, the first draft pick from the XFL, and they continued to address the defense, which Chris, they addressed a lot of their offensive needs in free agency. To draft all of your draft picks in just one side of the ball is something that we haven't really seen a whole lot of. But I think if any team needed to do this, though, it was Carolina. I think that what did you think about what they did with their draft?
I actually really, really liked it. I thought they hit on, especially their first four picks. I thought they hit like on the money. Derek Brown, obviously, great, best defensive tackle in the draft. Great pick. He's gonna fit right in. Needed the pass rush. Great. They kept on that in the second round with Yetur Gross-Matos, which he could have been a first rounder as well. You got him early second round. He can go off the edge. Boom. He can replace like Mario Addison potentially. So they got that need. Jeremy Chin, he's a great safety out of Southern Illinois. Not many people know about him. It's a great safety. Maybe and they get rid of because they got rid of Eric Reed. Eric Reed got cut, so that he can potentially go in and replace Eric Reed, and then Troy Pride he's a really good corner out of Notre Dame. Not the biggest person, but he's fast and he can cover ground very well.
Yeah, I really like a lot of these picks from Carolina. I thought that Derek Brown, despite Isaiah Simmons being on the board, I don't hate the pick. I think Isaiah Simmons would have been a great pick for them as well. But they eventually they took Derek Brown. They needed a defensive tackle. They got one to pair next to K'Wan Short, and then they addressed the linebacker position. Jeremy Chin maybe is someone that you could throw there. Can be a safety that can also jump and play linebacker. I'm also excited about this Kenny Robinson pick. He played well in the XFL last season, had multiple picks in a short sample size, yes, but I did like what I saw from there. What we're seeing now, Whitley, is Carolina. They have been with Ron Rivera's system for so long. They're showing with this draft they are moving on and they're rebranding themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of holes in this defense. I think ultimately what they did is just sort of draft the best defensive player on the board, which I think was a good move. I would have liked to have seen them get a better replacement for Luke Kuechly. That's the only thing I would have liked to have seen differently.
Yeah, that to me is still the biggest hole left, but the thing is, they had a hole at defensive tackle. They filled it. They had a hole at outside linebacker. In the pass rush, they filled it with Yetur Gross-Matos. They were able to fill some needs, and I think that yes, linebacker is still a big need for them. They need to find out who is going to be Luke Kuechly's replacement. So they need to figure that out. But other than that, they filled every need that they have. So I'm going to give Carolina a B in this draft. I like a lot of their early picks, and I think that they have some strong starters that they can have for several years. So a B is where I'm going with Carolina. Chris Wolf, what grade are we giving Carolina?
I'm giving them a B plus. I think they filled everything that they needed, other than linebacker to replace Luke Kuechly's spot, but that could be done in the future. Like replacing someone like Luke Kuechly is not going to happen like in an instant. Like he was one of the best if not the best in the league. He probably could have been he probably would have been a Hall of Famer if he was able to actually play a full career. So that will take time, but I think in the near future they were able to fill all their needs. I give it a B plus.
B plus from Chris Wolf. John Whitley, where are we going with Carolina?
Yeah, I'm gonna go B plus. I think ultimately they did the most with what they had as far as draft capital, and just it looks like they just picked best defensive player available in each round. If you want that A, you got to get a great replacement for Luke Kuechly. So I'm gonna go B plus.
B plus for Carolina. So let's move on to our final division in the NFC. We go to the NFC West. We'll start with the defending NFC champs, the San Francisco 49ers, who started off the draft with a bang. They went out and they made a trade for their first pick by trading just one spot back to get Javon Kinlaw to be DeForest Buckner's replacement. That's why they were, drafting so high to begin with. They also trade up in the first round, somewhat of a surprise considering how few picks they had, but they get Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State to help them at the wide receiver spot. Later in the draft, they go and they get Colton McKivitz, tackle. They get Charlie Werner, a tight end, and Jawan Jennings, a wide receiver from Tennessee. So, and considering the fact Joe Staley retired, they also traded for Trent Williams from Washington to fill in that void. So, Whitley, I'm going to start with you here. What did you think of the movement from San Francisco in round one?
Yeah, I loved it. It was aggressive. You saw you were just a few plays away from winning the Super Bowl. So I think to be aggressive, go all in on right now, and it could pay off for them this year.
Yeah, I think. Look, when we saw that trade, the Indianapolis for that first round pick, Javon Kinlaw was immediately a name that we saw as this could be the pick here. But, when we saw that, San Francisco had Jerry Jeudy on the board, they had CeeDee Lamb on the board, we're like, oh, well, maybe they'll go receiver, but they ultimately go defensive tackle. Do you think that was the right decision?
Yeah, I think that was the right decision simply because, we know this was a super deep receiver class. We knew they'd be able to get a good receiver later in the draft, particularly because they really just need a guy who can be a good number two, a complement to the man Deebo Samuel. So I think Kinlaw was definitely the right move here.
Yeah, Chris, do you agree with that?
Oh, I agree with that definitely because the defensive tackle was way thinner than wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
I think you go get the best available defensive tackle, which was Kinlaw at the time. Which, to be honest, I think if it wasn't for a couple of things, maybe he could have been the best one. Who knows? But he could end up being the best one. But I think that was the right decision to get Kinlaw, get the plug and play guy to replace DeForest Buckner from day one.
And the Niners traded up 6 spots from 31 and 25 to make Brandon Ayuk the 6th wide receiver to come out of this first round. Considering, and they had Ayuk, they took Ayuk over guys like T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Laviska Shenault, KJ Hamler. Chris, why do you think Ayuk went ahead of all of those guys that I just mentioned?
I think part of it may have to do with just fitting with the team. I think it might. I think they may have found that this Ayuk fits with this team more. He could be a deep threat, but he's an all around guy. You could play him. I think you could play him anywhere in the wide receiver area. You can throw him deep. You can have intermediate routes. You can get him in the screen game. You can get him in the slot. I think you can play him a bunch of different places.
Yeah, Ayuk is definitely versatile, and I think that ultimately that's what made him more valuable than the guys taken after him. Whitley, what do you think Ayuk could be in the NFL? Give me like a player comp, or what do you think his ceiling is stats wise?
Yeah, I kind of see him as the guy he's replacing in Emmanuel Sanders. I think, very similar type player. Not the best size, but great speed. Ability to create separation. He can make an impact on special teams. So I think he'll replace Emmanuel Sanders' production, be a very similar type player.
Yeah. Ayuk had 1,100, nearly 1,200 yards last season with 8 touchdowns. So definitely someone that could be a high volume guy for San Francisco that doesn't really have that at the wide receiver position anymore. But they have, they have Travis Benjamin now. Maybe he could fixate in part of that offensive attack for San Francisco. They didn't have a whole lot of picks, San Francisco, so. But I think they did what they had. They did as much as they could with what they had. I'm gonna give them a B minus. I'm not super sold on the Ayuk pick, to be fair. I think he might struggle a little bit given his size. Look, San Francisco. They have George Kittle is their guy, and he's still their guy, and that's okay. I think that you can have an offense that uses the tight end as its primary focus in today's NFL, and I think that the Niners should have that with Kittle, and they are a run first offense, so they're obviously going to utilize the running game more than the passing game. So to me, I don't necessarily know if Ayuk needed to be in the first round. I think they could have gotten him at 31. They could have even gotten him if they traded out of the first round and into the early second. So for me, that's why I'm going to give him a B minus rather than a higher grade. I think that Ayuk is a decent pick, just not for the value and where they got him in the draft. So B minus for the Niners for me. What do you think, Whitley?
Yeah, I think I agree. I'm not sure you had to trade back up to get him or necessarily to get a player of his value. I think even if he does go, you can still get like a KJ Hamler or a Chenault. But I'm gonna give them a B minus. You filled the holes you had to fill, and they should still be a competitive team right where they were last year.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what are you thinking?
I'm gonna give him a B. I'm gonna give him a B because obviously I love the Kinlaw pick.
Mm-hmm.
The IU pick I like, but I want to see him in the NFL. I want to see him before I actually am sold on him in the NFL. I liked him in college. I think an underrated one is Charlie Warner. I think that's an underrated pick just because George Kittle had to block a lot late in that Super Bowl. Remember, he had to block a lot in that Super Bowl, and that's what Charlie Warner is. He is legit. He is almost 90% used as a blocker. Barely ever used as a receiver. You could play two. You could if it takes not having an extra receiver, you can use him as a blocker, and George Kittle you can have him later in games as a receiver instead of maybe a blocker.
Yeah, and that's why they got him to mainly open up Kittle, I think. So a good day 3 find. But Chris, we're gonna move on to Seattle here, and you know a lot more about this Seattle draft class than either me and Whitley do. So I'm gonna just give it to you to give us the breakdown on this Seattle class.
So this Seattle class, it was interesting. It was a very interesting class. We took Jordan Brooks in the first round at 27, which, by the way, this is the first time in 8 years Seattle did not move their initial first-round pick in some way, which that's really
remarkable.
Surprising. And at first I was like, I like it, but I didn't watch a lot of film on him. I did look at his stats before, and they're very good. They're the type of stats we need. But I wanted to watch some film on him, and after watching film, I actually started to love the pick because his college coach is comparing him to Bobby Wagner, and also his college coach at Texas Tech was also the coach at Utah. Was also coaching at Utah State when Bobby Wagner was there. So he got credibility. So he knows a thing or two about both players. So I do really love, and I watched some highlights of him. He flies to the ball. Like he flies. Like he can fly the ball. He can pass rush a little bit. That may be a little bit of a non-strength, but he can definitely cover and tackle. He's big at 6 feet, 240 pounds, so he's pretty big for his height. And I mean, one of his more like memorable games this season was against Oklahoma State. At that time a top 25 team, where he had 19 tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble, and 4 tackles for loss. Like that's a ridiculous stat line. He was
Right.
also an All-American this year, and it was just I ended up falling in love with the pick after further evaluation on him and film.
What's a late round guy that Seattle fans should be really happy about?
Late round, you know what? I'm gonna go a little bit. I'm gonna go with Freddie Swain. He can take over for that kick return guy, because Tyler Lockett being the number one wide receiver right now, that takes a toll on you. You don't really want your number one wide receiver taking more risks at kick return, and they didn't really have a set one. They kind of had to put David Moore back there, which he really was not really what his skills were. So you're kind of just putting a random wide receiver back there. Freddie Swain did kick and punt returns in college. I think that's a good one. And also, even though we have a couple of tight ends, I think Colby Parkinson's a good one. I mean, because we've had a lot of injuries at tight end recently.
Mm-hmm.
Like Will Disley's great, but he's been hurt way too much. Greg Olson, he's there, but he's had some injuries too, and he's a little older, so he might not be getting the same load. And when having Colby Parkinson at 6'7", 250, that's throwing a basketball player pretty much.
What grade are you giving Seattle for this draft?
I'm gonna give it a solid B, because they were able to fill in voids at defensive end.
Mm-hmm.
They traded up 11 spots to get Darrell Taylor, which at first I was like, I don't know about this. But then when you look at the recent years that Seattle's traded up in the first 3 rounds, they traded up to get Tyler Lockett, they traded up to get DK Metcalf, and they traded up to get Jaron Reed. Because all 3 have panned out very well for Seattle.
Yeah.
I trust that Pete Carroll and Deion Sanders know what they're doing with that pick.
Yeah.
And I think they were just solid. They got the pass rushers they need. They were able to fill linebacker because Michael Kendricks is a free agent. KJ Wright, we don't know what's with him. Bobby Wagner isn't getting any younger. I think that was good. Getting a special teams guy in Swain was good. Getting another backup tight end ish due to all the injuries, I think that was pretty solid as well. And getting a guard to replace DJ Fluke was also good.
Mm-hmm. I think the fact also that they traded up to get Darrell Taylor. Jaron Reed now wears number 90. It makes you think that Jadeveon Clowney's time as a Seattle Seahawk is coming to an end as well. So the fact that they addressed the front 7 early in this draft kind of makes you think that that they needed it, and it's because Clowney is not going to return. Whitley, what are you thinking for Seattle for this draft?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't really like this draft class. I think Jordan Brooks has the potential to be a huge bust now. I think he's going to struggle to get off blocks in the NFL. And then, the Darrell Taylor pick, it's I feel like at best he's going to be just a guy. So, I think I'll give them a C, just because the only reason it's not lower is because, these guys have a chance to blossom into something. But, not a great draft for Seattle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, Seattle got a lot of guys that they could have gotten later in the draft. Like, a lot of the guys they got are guys that don't meet the value. But the thing is, Seattle is a team that usually picks guys that are earlier than their perceived value, and they turn out to be really good picks. So I'm not going to, Seattle obviously knows a thing that we don't. So for me, I'm going to give Seattle a C. I'm going to give them a C, because I think that although I don't think you can deny that this draft is very talented, they do have guys that I think could be long-term starters. I just don't know if the star quality is there in this draft, and I think that they got a lot of guys that, to be honest, they could have traded back and they could have gotten. I think they could have gotten Darrell Taylor at their original late second round pick. I think they could have gotten Jordan Brooks early in the second if they traded back like they usually do. So to me, I think that's why I give Seattle the low grade, not necessarily talent, but more so because of the value of these picks. So now we'll move on to the LA Rams, who again are still who don't have a first round pick this draft, and they probably won't have them for a while. But their first round pick or their first pick in this draft was Cam Akers, running back to help fill the void that Todd Gurley left as he was cut earlier in the offseason. Van Jefferson from Florida was their second pick. They went out and they also get two Terrells in the third round, Terrell Lewis from Alabama and Terrell Burgess from Utah at safety in the third. So, Whitley, I'll come to you. Cam Akers leads this draft class. What did you think of Cam Akers coming out of this draft, and do you think he can be successful in the NFL?
Yeah, I think he will be successful in the NFL. I think, first off, the Rams, I think they kind of had to go best available running back because, especially after Cam Akers, I think there was a huge drop-off in running backs. I think he was really productive in college for how bad his offensive line was. At one point, I even thought he might be the best running back in this whole draft class. Mm-hmm. So I think you got a good number one back in Cam Akers.
Yeah, Cam Akers was drafted right before J.K. Dobbins at 55. So I think that I think Cam Akers, though, I was really impressed with him coming out of Florida State. I think that he will benefit from a better offensive line. And he's going to a really, really good position with the Rams, considering they have a big hole at the top of their running back depth chart. He could be the starter right away, and he could run for 1,000 yards in his first year. I really believe it. I think that LA needs. They struggled last year because they had the receivers. The receivers wasn't the issue. It was more about the running backs. They didn't have. The Todd Gurley was not 100%. So they couldn't, utilize him as they could have. I think that's why the Rams when they were the most successful was when Todd Gurley was 100%. And now they have a Cam Akers who is a similar player to Gurley, I'd say. He's definitely an in-between the tackles guy. So I'm really pleased with the Akers pick. I think that this could be a real solid pickup for them. I think down the road he could be their guy of the future. He's by far LA's best pick in this draft. And for a team that isn't going to have a whole lot of draft pieces, to do, they really needed to hit on their first pick, and I think they did here with Cam Akers. Chris, other than Cam Akers, though, what picks did you like from LA in this draft?
I like Terrell Lewis.
Yes.
That was a very good
Whitley
pick.
also likes Terrell Lewis.
It's a very good pick. I mean, it's a very good pick. It's third round. He got him in the third round. He missed a lot of games. He missed 25 games at Alabama, so that's probably why his stock dropped. But if he didn't miss that many games, he probably could have been He probably could have been a late first round pick. Like, that's how good he was. And the fact you're able to get him in the third round, if he can stay healthy, that will be a steal in this draft class.
Yeah, I think that I think Terrell Lewis could have gone in the second round, but he ended up going, in the third. So I think that was a steal for them as well. I was confused a little bit by the Van Jefferson pick. I think, considering the fact that Denzel Mims was still on the board, I think he could have gone there. Antonio Gibson was still there. They could have. Devin Duvernay, I think, was a better receiver prospect than Van Jefferson. So I don't know. That pick was a bit confusing to me. I think they got a lot of, ups and downs with this draft class. I think Akers and Lewis are obviously the highlights, but you get guys like Van Jefferson, who I think were taken way beyond where they should have gone. I think that Bryson Hopkins is a questionable pick considering the tight ends. They didn't really need a tight end that early in the draft. I feel like I think they're fine with Everett and Higbee. I think that Bryson Hopkins is going to struggle to see the field. So for me, I'm going to give the Rams a C. I don't think that they came out of this draft. I think Cam Akers is their best pick, but he's also, a mid-second round pick. They didn't get a first rounder. Their first rounder in this draft is Jalen Ramsey. So Jalen Ramsey better be the top 5 pick that he was originally drafted for. But yeah, I'll give a C for the Rams for this draft. What do you guys think?
I'll give it a C plus. I'm gonna value Lewis and Akers. I'll value them well enough to give them a slightly above average grade. Because to be honest, all their other picks I am not completely a fan of, other than those 2 picks. But I'm going to value them high because I think they're both starters, and I think Cam Akers could become a 1,000-yard back most years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Whitley, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm gonna go B-. I like where they got Cam Akers. I'm very proud of them for picking him over Dobbins. I'm not a big Dobbins guy. And then I think where you drafted Terrell Lewis is a huge steal in the 3rd round. If you could keep this guy on the field, he really could have been a 1st-round pick. So I think Terrell Lewis is as good of a 3rd-round pick as you could have asked for, and I think Cam Akers, really has the chance to be something as well.
Yeah. And we'll move on to the final team in the NFC. In my opinion, the team that had the best draft in the NFC is the Arizona Cardinals. And you start off the draft by getting, in my opinion, the best player in the draft in Isaiah Simmons. And the fact that he was able to fall to 8, linebacker was not the biggest need for Arizona with Chandler Jones, Jordan Hicks, Devon Kennard, who they recently signed, Devondre Campbell. They didn't need a linebacker, but they went and they got Isaiah Simmons anyway, which they got the best player available at that position. It was the right pick. He can play corner, he can play safety, he can play linebacker, you can throw him on the line if you wanted to. And not only did they do that, they didn't have a 2nd-round pick because they traded it for DeAndre Hopkins, which, if you count DeAndre Hopkins as your 2nd-round pick, that obviously helps this class. Josh Jones was their 3rd-round pick, who also could have been a 1st-round pick. A guy that can start at tackle, I feel like, right away. I'm not sure if he will exactly, but definitely someone that can be a starter there long term. They got 2 defensive tackles in the 4th. One of them will for sure be a long-term starter. It's either going to be Leki Fotu from Utah or Rashard Lawrence from LSU, both guys that I feel like could be quality starters in this league. So that's your first 4 picks. All of them major hits, I feel like. Obviously, I think it's going to be tough for both Fotu and Rashard Lawrence to see the field for Arizona, but I think that I really liked what Arizona did with this draft. I can't stop praising them. Someone take the wheel from me. Maybe you guys have a different opinion than me. Chris, what do you think?
I mean, to be honest, it was a very good draft. Like, that was a very good draft. It was, in my opinion, the most impactful in this division. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, it was easily the most impactful because I'm counting DeAndre Hopkins as their 2nd-round pick. I'm counting that. So you essentially, with your first 2 picks, got Isaiah Simmons and DeAndre Hopkins. What better could you ask for?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll tell you, my favorite pick for them was this Josh Jones pick, just because you got him in the 3rd round. I would have rather Green Bay picked him in the 1st round than Jordan Love. So I think that's a huge steal in the 3rd round.
I was very surprised he dropped that far.
Yeah, it's like Arizona just kind of like shrugged their shoulders and were like, "Oh, this guy's available. Okay, we'll take him. Yeah, sure, why not?" And they also got Benjamin in the 7th round, a guy from Arizona State. They have Kenyon Drake, they have Chase Edmonds, but Benjamin could actually, I feel like I could see him figuring into that backfield in some way, shape, or form. I think that he also, he was the best player available on the draft for a while, but then ultimately, and he kept falling. But I think Arizona is a very good spot for him. He's a 2-time first team All Pac-12. So, I mean, clearly the guy's got talent, and they got him in the 7th round as well. So, honestly, Arizona gets an A+ for me. They hit it out of the park in this draft. I can't say any more good things about them. I've said them all. I don't see how they could have improved their team more. I mean, they spent their last draft, focusing on, the offense with, getting those receivers in place. I think they got 3 receivers in last year's draft. They got Kyler Murray. And then this draft, they used it to really focus on just filling in those gaps. They didn't really have a huge position of need, but they ended up getting, a tackle. We were talking about them getting a tackle in the eighth pick, to get maybe a top 2-3 tackle in the draft. They ended up getting a top, maybe 6 tackle, but in the 3rd round. So I think, look, every pick they had was valuable in some way, shape, or form. So for me, A+ from Arizona is the only A+ that I'm giving for the NFC is the Arizona Cardinals. What do you guys think?
I'm giving it an A. I mean, there's not much more you can say. Got better on the offensive line. Got better at wide receiver with trading the 2nd-round pick. Got better on defense, getting Isaiah Simmons, and got the 2 defensive tackles. So, and then, and to be honest, got some depth. You have some depth at running back now. Mm-hmm. Now you have running back depth. I mean, there is not much more you could have asked for.
Exactly. Whitley, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm gonna go A+ to get Isaiah Simmons at 8, a steal. Then 2nd round, you're not going to get somebody better than DeAndre Hopkins with a 2nd round pick. Mm-hmm. So you're not giving up much there. And then Josh Jones, like I said, I have a 1st round grade on that kid. So I think they as a Cardinals fan, you really couldn't have asked for a better draft.
Yeah. So from my recollection, the top teams from this draft, I think we can all agree, are Arizona and Minnesota. We think Minnesota had great draft with them going high, with getting a lot of strong pieces early in the draft. Arizona doing the same, and then the teams that we felt like didn't do that good of a job. Chicago not getting a whole lot of strong pieces. Obviously, not having that 1st round pick hurts their draft. And unfortunately, John Whitley, your Green Bay Packers, not the strongest draft from them. So, but overall, I mean, if we look at the NFC, do you think that this draft really changed things for one team in particular? Like, will this draft change the balance of power in the NFC? And if so, where? Maybe in a division. It could be the conference. It could be the division. It could be, this team has the future at one position. What are we thinking?
I'm gonna stay with their last team. I think what Arizona just did made the NFC West a war zone this season, because you have the last 2 NFC champions in there. You obviously have Seattle. It's in there. They're always in the playoffs, and now you have an Arizona team that is stacked this season. Like that is gonna be a war zone of a division, probably the best in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Whitley, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think Arizona had a good draft. I don't think this draft alone changes the balance of power in the NFC West just because of what they have to compete against. I think that if there is a team that changed the balance of power in their division with this draft, I'm gonna say it was the Dallas Cowboys, because I think CeeDee Lamb is that good. And I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity because of the weapons that offense will open things up for him. And he's one of those guys, all you got to do is put the ball in his hands, He's that good. And then to get Trayvon Diggs in the 2nd round, huge steal. And then, the Gallimore pick almost makes up for the lost pick of Tristan Hill last year, who, sorry to say, has not panned out. So, to me, if anybody did this draft, I'm going to say Dallas.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with what Chris. I'm gonna go back with where Chris was going with Arizona. I don't necessarily think that this will change next year's outcome, or maybe even the year after that. But I feel like when Arizona becomes a contender again, a lot of these players they picked in this draft and in the last draft will be the core of that team, and will be the reason why Arizona is contending. So for me, that's the answer that I'm going with, is Arizona. I also like what Minnesota did. I think Minnesota moved a step in the right direction towards getting there in the NFC North, whereas the Packers didn't take that same step up. Not necessarily do I think that they took a step back, but I think that the gap between Green Bay and Minnesota is smaller than what it was before the draft began. So that's my, I guess, honorable mention answer. But again, I guess that's all the time we have for now. Whitley and C-Dub, Chris Wolf, thank you so much for talking NFC draft classes with me. It's a lot of fun talking with you guys about anything and football especially. So I want to thank you guys once again for coming on today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Always a
And,
pleasure, man.
even though HTS Season 10 came to an end with the draft show, we are continuing our coverage of, sports despite this pandemic with the HTF podcast and with Hitting the Crew and with Take Me Out to the Podcast. So be sure to check those out on wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can catch them on our YouTube channel at Hitting the Field. Be sure to subscribe now. And you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hitting the Field. We've got a lot of fun stuff in store. You can check out our Last Dance recap podcast every Monday while the Last Dance is going on. And we also have the AFC podcast coming out in the next day or two, so be sure to keep your eyes out for that. We also have some fun podcasts in store while sports are still on hold, but once sports come back, hopefully that's in the next couple of weeks, we will be still here talking them here on the HTF podcast. So again, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the HTF podcast, and we'll catch you on the flip side.